Dexter, you're able to see this? Dexter, are you able to see that? I'm assuming you're on mute because I'm not hearing anything from you,
It's
Dexter.
really quiet on your end, Gundy.
Hey, it's coming up now.
Are you speaking or?
Yeah, well,
your ducks in a row?
I'm speaking. All right. How am I sounding now, Dexter?
Gundy, I'm hearing you clear.
Okay.
Well, apparently I.
All right. So I'm going to continue on. Somebody interrupt if they can't hear me or if things get wonky with the presentation. Hopefully I can remember my notes now that I can't see them. Okay, so this presentation is going to be teaching characteristics of plants that have been treated with herbicides and how to tell the rate of decline. So most of you guys, well, most of you men and women in your jobs are applying herbicide. That's actually a job I have not done. What I do with FNA is the compliance inspections of FWC funded treatments to see if the treatments have gone well. As far as herbicides, we've pretty much left that to IFIS because they have such a good and broad source of information on herbicides and which to use for which species. It's not exactly all perfectly compiled with IFIS. You may have to Google search around a bit to find the best information for the species you're looking for, but they definitely have the most information of any single organization. And the one thing that's really lacking, which we're addressing here, is what does it look like when plants are treated, and are treated plants controlled or not? So we'll go over the timeline of what that looks like. We're going to go over the inspection windows and when you should inspect. And then we've got a few exceptions where they don't follow the rules on how long it should take them to decline. And then we also have a little special section on climbing ferns and what those are going to look like from year to year, since the material stays behind. And lastly, there will be a little bit on the sublethal effects of treatments. All right, so our first stage is going to be that the leaf tips and the twig tips, which are apical meristems, are going to brown and curl a bit. The far left photo is downy rose myrtle. This plant was actually part of a cut stump treatment, but this particular stem didn't get cut, which just happened to allow for me to take a nice photo showing the decline. Had that been treated with a normal foliar, it may have looked a bit different. The middle photo is coral ardesia. You can very clearly see the curling tip there. And up top here on the right photo, you can see in the circle, there's a little brown section there. And that is a browning apical meristem, as well as there are brown leaves below. Oops, too far. The next stage is that leaves typically start looking burned. They get brown and wrinkly or discolored and misshapen. And this is an obvious sign that it has uptaken the herbicide and it is on its way down. Again, on the left is downy rose myrtle. You can see that that leaf is very brown. The tip of it is misshapen now. And it has lost all green color. In the center, this was actually just taken a few weeks ago here in Tallahassee. That's a Chinese tallow that received a poor treatment. That one's 17 weeks after treatment, so that should have been a completely dead plant. But instead, all that was left was some discoloration and the leaves misshapen and looking pretty funky, and a little bit of the leaf tip browning and looking burnt. And then off to the right is Old World climbing fern, where the little lobes on the sporulating pinnules are starting to show browning, and then beneath that oval is a wholly dead pinnule. And so this particular climbing fern would not have been considered control. That plant is going to bounce back. Even though some of it has died, enough of it is remaining that those vigorous vines are going to make their way back to life and reinvading that cypress tree. The next stage after, just the initial misshapening of leaves and a little bit of browning is that we get a whole lot of discoloration. And we also get, for woody plants, the cambium is going to still remain green, but the exterior parts of the plant are going to show their effects. So again, on the left, there was a downy rose myrtle that was treated with herbicide for a cut stump treatment. I think that was a Mazapir. And so it's surviving that because it just wasn't treated properly, because they were supposed to cut that plant and then treat it. This center picture, or second from the left, I guess, is Brazilian pepper. The bottom circle, you can see there's a browning leaf tip, and all of the leaflets there are losing their green color, showing discoloration. There's patches of brown coming in. That was an incidental sighting that we saw, and we didn't actually know treatment history of that one. And then off to the right, we have Old World climbing fern in a dome swamp that has had a partial decline. You can see pretty much the left side looks very brown. There's very little green left there, but the right side has a lot of green left. So that plant is not going to be considered controlled. That one is going to bounce back. At this stage, a lot of the plants will still hold their general shape, but they're going to look stressed, very stressed and unhealthy. All right, our third stage is when plants start to look really unhealthy. You get leaves that have gone flaccid often, or they've browned. The leaf shape and is very misshapen or just totally shriveled up. And you're going to see on woody plants in that photo to the far right, the cambium is discolored. You can see some brown in there on the left scrape, and then a little bit of green left. And so that's your evidence that that plant has uptaken the herbicide and is on its way out. For a lot of tree species, that's going to be an important consideration to look at the cambium, because there are quite a few trees that will look perfectly healthy, especially if they were treated in the fall or winter and you're inspecting in the spring. And so they may not have shown the physical traits of being treated, but on the outside anyway. But if you just, cut away some bark, you're going to see that cambium's looking sort of like it's rotting a little bit. On the left, that photo is coral ardesia. That is a pretty typical look for coral ardesia that is on its way out. That plant will be controlled. In this case, this was actually a winter treatment, and we were there in early spring. And so we're actually going to see later in the presentation that coral ardesia is very slow to decline. And the center photo is heavenly bamboo. You can barely make out that the top stems have lost their leaves, and then you can see that it's showing reddish leaves, almost like it has fall colors, which doesn't really exist in Florida. And so that's a sign that heavenly bamboo has taken up herbicide and is on its way out. And that's another one of our slow dying species. Now, this is the final stage that is quite obvious when it's done right. On the left is downy rose myrtle again. In the center, we have earleaf acacia. and you can just see the leaves are brown, dead, crispy. Those are totally gone. Those plants are going to be totally controlled. Um, at this stage, though, a lot of times for most species, the fruits will still be attached as well. Some species might have the leaves drop off, but the fruits usually will stay attached. Um, Melaleuca is a good example that comes to mind where the fruit capsules on Melaleuca tend to stay on a controlled plant, even if it's cut stumped and just laying on the ground. Those fruit capsules can stay there for a year. And then for woody species, if you know cut open the bark again, you're going to see that that bark is dead and gray. And if that cambium or the cambium is dead and gray, if you see the cambium looking like this, the tree itself probably also shows a lot of signs of decay in the leaves. Okay, so when to inspect treatments. We've got this split up by the type of treatment. Our first one here is foliar treatments. And herbaceous species will usually start to show that the herbicide has taken its effect in 6 to 8 weeks. That's the soonest you would really want to go in and inspect. But there are a lot of times where that's just the beginning of the top kill, and there may be regrowth happening later on down the timeline. And so it tends to pay off to inspect a little later than sooner. Good example is the top right photo here. That was Wedelia, and all that dead plant matter underneath it is old Wedelia vines that have, not vines, but spreading. Actually, I'm not sure what to call that. It's not a rhizome. I'm so used to using the word rhizome, but that's incorrect. But that leaf there is spreading, and you can see that that plant is coming back despite being right on top of dead material that was treated prior. And then we have some pretty obviously dead Kogan grass on the bottom right. If you look really closely, you'll be able to see a few lime green leaf blades in the mix there. And so that kind of shows that it is definitely on its way out, but it has not fully died back. Going back to the left photo, that was the worst air potato infestation I think I have ever seen personally. This was at Archie Carr National Wildlife Refuge, and you can see that they have actually done poodle cuts of the air potato, and there's just brown dead material everywhere throughout the canopy of the oak trees they were in and along the ground. Oh, Oh, I did not know I had this set up this way. So here's Kogan in the center with a treatment 10 weeks ago, or 10 weeks prior to the photo. There's still some green left in there, and that's going to be questionable whether that would be controlled. It would probably err towards the side of not controlled. As you can see, the Kogan on the right is looking a whole lot more browned and dead. Okay. And so that air potato was only 6 to 8 weeks after treatment. With the poodle cut, pretty much everything above the poodle cut is going to die, but that may not necessarily be true for all cases for the material left on the ground. And so this was an excellent treatment of that air potato. So here's a foliar treatment of some woody species. We've got Chinese tallow on the left showing drooping leaves. The leaves have changed color to red. It kind of looks like it's fall/winter coloration, except that it's looking pretty unhealthy. And that was only 6 to 10 weeks after a foliar treatment. In the center, we have camphor, and it's pretty much in the same state. It's got drooping leaves and completely miscolored leaves that have gone red. I don't recall a time of year for either of these photos to know if part of that was natural seasonal based discoloration. And then off to the right, We have a Brazilian pepper, only 6.5 weeks after treatment, that is really far along, showing that the leaves are um, not quite browned. They're not, dead and crispy, but they are definitely showing that that plant is on its way out. All the leaves are drooping. Most of the leaves have lost all green coloration, and they're even starting to wrinkle a bit. So for woody species, for foliar treatments, 6 weeks after treatment is the soonest you want to look. Um, in contrast with back on the last slide was herbaceous species, 6 to 8 weeks. So cut stump treatments. These are a little tougher, or at least you need to wait a little longer. It's not that they're tougher. You need to wait a little longer to inspect them, because obviously, a tree on the ground looks dead. But what will often happen is in that 8 week or so time frame, they start to sprout again from the stump if they were not completely controlled. On the left, we have a melaleuca that was cut stump, and inside the blue circle is the stump that it came from. It's a little hard to see, but it's browned. The cambium is totally miscolored, kind of looks like it's rotting away, and so that one is a goner. Um, in the center here, we have another melaleuca that was only 9.5 weeks after treatment. Um, I'm not positive, but that may have even been the same project. And that plant has started to regrow from the stump. And so that is not going to be a controlled plant. If you're out there taking data for your compliance inspection, um, your data should show that there was no change in coverage. So it's not like you're going to say, oh, it went from a little, a tree to a small little sprout. Essentially, that is the whole tree is eventually going to come back up. And then on the upper right, we've got another melaleuca that has been cut stumped. You can see the whole plant there to the side, and then almost back to the same original height, 18 to 21 weeks later, we have a sprout that is looking real healthy, real vibrant, and very resistant to the treatment. And then our bottom right photo, that was earleaf acacia, and that one is totally controlled, nothing growing back. And so that is an excellent example of what it should look like at least 10 to 12 weeks after treatment. So again, reiterating, if you've got cut stump treatments, you want to wait a little bit longer, wait 10 to 12 weeks before you go out there to inspect to determine whether control has been achieved, because it's going to look dead, of course, at the beginning. And then if it wasn't completely controlled with proper herbicide application, then the plants are going to come back. All right, so hack and squirt treatment. So we went from foliar to cut stump, and now we're on hack and squirt. And a lot of the hack and squirt and basal bark are pretty similar as far as the time frame it takes and the rate of effects to happen. You want to delay your treatment a little bit less than cut stump, but still 8 to 12 weeks is probably when you want to get out there. At the 6 week period, especially if treatment happened in the fall or winter, you're probably not going to see any signs of decline. The center photo here is a big patch of Brazilian pepper where some of it, you can see off to the right side, the trees holding fruits are completely de-leaved. They look completely dead, but there's still pepper throughout that area. And what we think happened in this case was that the contractor had a hard time recognizing non-fruiting Brazilian pepper. And so in this particular project, we had seen a lot of fruit-bearing pepper trees completely controlled right next to either male plants or immature plants that just didn't either didn't get treatment or the treatment was just not effective. And that was only 6.5 weeks after treatment, which is definitely on the early end. And then to the right here was a camphor tree in, where was that? Gainesville, that has had hacks. The treatment occurred in winter. There were clearly hacks on the tree. You can see the dripping marks from herbicide application. But what we couldn't show is that the canopy of this camphor tree is completely healthy looking. Nothing looks wrong with it at all. And we actually consulted with John Kunzer at FWC about this particular project and the camphor trees. And John Kunzer taught us a neat little trick that if you have a basal bark application, if you cut into the tree, if herbicide has been applied and taken into the plant, you should be able to smell the smell of diesel. And so that is a good way to check if a tree received treatment, because there were some trees there that had no hack marks and we weren't sure if they'd received treatment or not. So reiterating, hack and squirt treatments, 8 to 12 weeks, a little bit less time than a cut stump treatment, and definitely a significant more time than checking on herbaceous foliar treatments. Oh, the little purple box there is an inset showing that there were some plants that received treatment. There's some Brazilian pepper that's showing its rate of decline. It's completely yellowed, almost no green coloration left. And there's the zoomed in version. So that plant is going down. That will be considered controlled in time. But at only 6.5 weeks, it wasn't fully brown and crispy. So here's basal bark treatments. The left photo here is completely defoliated, and the second from the left photo is the same tree, just looking at the base of it with one of our Trimble data loggers for size reference. And that is, at only 6.5 weeks, it is obvious that tree is completely controlled. And on the right here, we have some peppers that were treated about 12 weeks before the photo, and those are very brown and crispy. In fact, I think I remember taking some of those photos. They were even a little grayed. And so you want to check for the condition of the leaves, and I'm sorry. And if you've got a knife with you in the field or something of the sort, cutting into that cambium for a tree that otherwise looks healthy and seeing if you can smell the herbicide is actually an effective way. I have yet to do this in the field, but I know John Kunzer knows a whole lot more than I do, so I'm going to trust his information there. All right, so we have some plants that are exceptions, that they take up herbicide really slowly and even more slowly under certain conditions that can be seasonal or environmental. The first here is tuberous sword fern. In the shade, this plant can seem to take forever to die back. You can see within the first or after about 6 weeks, you can usually start to see whether the plants are declining. The patch may be still entirely green. This photo on the left shows that most of that patch actually had died back, but the zoomed in photo here shows where the ferns are starting to drop some of the pinnules. And that's your first sign that tuberous sword fern has taken up the herbicide and is on its way to control. This was actually an instance where we were not sure whether things were controlled or not, and more time needed to pass to confirm that patch had died back. And we actually inspected the same project the next year and confirmed that it had died back. So for tuberous sword fern, it may take up to 6 months, 3 to 6 months, before things look dead the way you would like them to look if you're treating this plant. So if only a few weeks after treatment you are seeing still green ferns, look a little closer, check the pinnules, and see if they're starting to drop pinnules. This photo that's on the right now, this is 11 weeks after treatment, or actually it was more than 11 weeks after treatment. And there are still some plants left up. It's really hard to see here, but a lot of the little gray stems in the photo are leafless fronds of the tuberous sword fern. Some of them have stayed green, but you'll see, if you look closely, you can see that all of those fronds have missing pinnules, and so those will or should eventually die back completely. This is slower in the shade than in full sun. Um, and so that's another consideration. A lot of sword fern tends to grow in shade. So it's going to take a lot longer than than you would probably prefer for it to show its signs of control. And then here we have another zoomed in photo showing the fronds with missing pinnules. There's a little bit of loss of green and yellowing too. But the sign of dropping pinnules is a good sign that that plant is taking up herbicide and is on its way to control. And you may just need to come back another few weeks later to ensure that that patch of not climbing fern, tuberous sword fern is controlled. And our next exception plant is Coral ardesia. This one can be really tricky, especially if treatments happened in fall or winter. It can take a real long time for the effects of herbicide to show. In some cases, if you were to check, if treatments happen in the winter and you were to check soon after, there's a lot of plants that would look really healthy still and may show very little decline. And you need to wait a bit longer in those cases. So that plant on the right is a good example. For this plant, you may want to wait a bit longer to inspect if the whole treatment tends to look like this, and wait for the growing season so that the plant's metabolism increases and it starts actually bringing in the herbicide and it has allowed it to take effects. So this is a good reverse sequence of Coral ardesia. The plant on the left, dead and crispy. That one is definitely controlled. There's no question there. The plant second from the left is an example we showed earlier that is the leaves are all flaccid and drooping. They're starting to misshapen and curl. And that is also going to be a controlled plant. And then the second from the right or third from the left photo is a pretty typical look of Coral ardesia in the 6 to 12 week time frame, where it gets this actually kind of fairly attractive salmon color. But usually if that salmon colors happen, the leaves are drooping, they're flaccid, they don't hold their shape anymore, they're curling, and you'll often be able to see that the meristem at the top is browned and drooping and looking very unhappy. So if you have a Coral ardesia treatment, especially if that Coral ardesia treatment happened in the fall or winter, your initial inspection, you may need to be looking for the effects on the entire treatment and the condition of all the plants and not just individually, because there have been times where a plant just 1 meter away on the same project looks healthy while another looks completely gone. And in fact, the photos 2, 3, and 4, I believe, are all from the same treatment. So that is something to consider. Is you might need to wait till spring when things are growing and the plant becomes metabolically active for Coral ardesia treatments to really show their true colors, pun intended. All right, so all of these were greater than 11 and a half weeks after treatment. Pretty sure my photo on the left there is well after 11 and a half weeks. I think that was like 17 weeks after treatment from a different project. Okay, here's more coral Ardesia examples. We've got drooping leaves and minor discoloration, but you can see that the apical meristem, that top arrow, is browned. So that plant is on its way out. And if you're inspecting in February or March, you can probably consider that plant controlled. At least you should go back in a few more weeks, even maybe a few months later, and check it again. The two center photos, they show a little bit more decline. And then the far right photo, that was actually taken in Tallahassee here a few weeks ago. And that is what you really want to see. That treatment was, I think, like 17 to 21 weeks after treatment. There it is, 17 weeks after treatment. And that treatment occurred in spring when the plants were already metabolically active. So you can see, like, that's dead. That's dead and crispy. There's no questions there. But really, all four photos show plants that are showing control. But they've happened at different times of year. And so the status of the plants looks quite a bit different. And our third exception plant is heavenly bamboo. This one's less common on inspections that we've done, but the photo on the left there shows a plant that is almost 12 weeks after treatment, and it's lost a bunch of leaves towards the top. The lower leaves are attached but discolored, and they're even looking a little bit droopy. Whereas this plant on the right did not receive adequate treatment, and it's pretty much looking the way it should, as far as, well, the way it should as a live plant. So the plant on the left we can consider controlled. You may want to go back in a couple of months to ensure that it's totally controlled and make sure that that plant does not regrow from the stem. I have seen that a couple of times where heavenly bamboo has resprouted along the main stem, and even though it looked otherwise dead. So this is another one you need to, you're going to want to wait a little bit longer or revisit a couple of times over a period of 3 to 6 months to ensure that the heavenly bamboo is actually controlled. All right, climbing ferns. These are my favorites as far, you know, they're just so dramatic. So to the left here, we have some treatment from that year, only 4.5 weeks after treatment, and it's very, very brown. So current year treatments of climbing fern are going to be very brown. There's really no mistaking them, especially if you have not had a treatment before. It's going to look very, very dead. In this case, most of those pinnules on the pinnae are dropped, and you pretty much are left with just a lot of brown rachises. I say stems, technically the correct term on a fern is rachises. And then in the center photo, we have a drape that's over a year old, and it's gray and oxidized from being in the sun a long time. So when there's just an old treatment greater than a year old, it's pretty obvious that that was not treated recently because it's so gray. And then we get into a little more confusing situations like the photo on the right, an excellent example of multiple year treatments. And we have kind of center left is a big clump of gray. That would have been a treatment from the year prior. And then in the foreground is a lot of brown, and a couple of drapes in the back left there are very brown. And then unfortunately, it was not a completely controlled treatment. And there are also green leaves running through the center from left to right, where we still have living climbing fern, and the fronds are still up and looking fairly healthy. Another thing that can kind of help determine whether treatment occurred this year or a prior year is the strength of the rachises. If you have a drape of freshly treated climbing fern, a big drape, you would actually be able to hang your body off of it and swing around like Tarzan, and I have for fun. Whereas the older treatments are a bit more fragile, and if you take just a single frond and pull it, it's gonna break. It may take a little bit of strength, but it's gonna break. Whereas a single frond of climbing fern that was treated this year is really strong, and as you go to break it, you're going to be wondering if it's going to cut into your skin first. So they maintain a lot of strength, and that can be a nice way to determine whether you have a recently or past treated climbing fern, is by the strength of those rachises, and does it break fairly easily, or is this something strong like monofilament fishing line? Here we have an example of Old World and Japanese climbing fern, both treated, both controlled. The left photo is Old World climbing fern, and the right photo is Japanese climbing fern. It's not terribly often, at least on our inspections, that we get to see climbing ferns still holding on to those leaflets or pinnules. A lot of times they have dropped them. And so this is what it would look like for each of these species. You can still see the long terminal lobe on the Japanese climbing fern to help separate the two species. Both of these are sporulating, so they have finger-like margins. But if you were to see the non-sporulating Japanese climbing fern, it doesn't have those same margins. The margins are entire, and so it also will look a bit different. It's also quite unusual, not quite unusual, I guess, but it's a lot less common to see both of these species growing side by side to know which is which during a treatment, but it does happen. Okay, so sublethal effects. So plants that have received treatment, but they are not considered controlled. A good sign is irregular leaf growth. Let's bring in this inset here. This you can see the leaves are drooping and they're curled, but these are new leaves, not old leaves, and these are regrowing. And so that plant is actually going to come back. You can see the hack treatments on the bark there was quite overzealous, maybe. But still, despite all those hack marks, that the underground material of that tree is coming back. And on the right, we have a plant here. I don't remember what species this is. Dexter, can you chime in and tell us?
Yeah, it's downy rose myrtle.
Oh, okay. So downy rose myrtle here with leaves that are coming back. You can kind of see they're growing in weird clumps, and they're along the main stem there and not growing along many of the branchlets. That in general for a plant having leaves coming out of the stem or trunk is a good sign of stress. For any of those that are in the panhandle that were around for Hurricane Michael, you are now seeing lots of trees around the panhandle that have leaves coming out of the main trunk from the damage that occurred during the storm. That's a really interesting landscape level thing that we've witnessed here in the panhandle over the last few years. On the left here is the same photo I showed earlier of Wedelia, where there's plenty of dead plant material below, but it has actually come back from underground material, and that plant is not fully controlled and will eventually return to its original coverage. There's a so for time frame's sake, that was 18 to 21 weeks after treatment. So had we been there at 12 weeks after treatment, that probably would have looked completely controlled. We probably only would have seen just dead material on the ground. But it turns out you wait a little bit longer and the plants bounce back. Nature is resilient. We have a Chinese tallow here in the center, the same photo as earlier. This is 17 weeks after treatment, and this was just barely showing signs of decline, but not fully dead in any way. On the right, we have a patch of coral ardesia, and the foreground lowest plants, or leaves, I should say, are showing some yellowing. But overall, that patch was not showing signs of decline. The photos that I showed earlier for coral ardesia were from the same project as this. So you can see that there's quite a difference in the state of plant health. So this particular patch would not be considered controlled. It has shown itself to be resilient. And this was 13 weeks after treatment, and that treatment occurred in the fall. And then our inspection happened in March. So it was just at the beginning of the growing season. And so this should have started to show a lot greater sign of deterioration, like the other plants we showed on the coral ardesia slides. All right, now we have some grasses. The level of water inundation in your grass treatments can make a huge effect on the rate of decline. The more water you have, the slower that rate of decline seems to be. And coming up here, there are some, here's a nice table showing that difference. So there's, basically in the 80 to 90% range of all of these plants that happen to like wet areas, all of these grasses, there's 80 to 90% control there if it's on dry land. But if you're in a flooded situation or right up against the edge of a wetland, there can be very little control happening. And this table came from a published paper with IFAS and FWC. And so it not only may take longer, but it also may actually be resilient against treatment in a flooded situation. So if you have a really bad grass infestation that you are trying to take care of, it is best for you to wait for your dry season, whichever that may be in Florida, whether you're in North or South Florida. And if you know the hydro periods of your depression marshes, for example,
it's best to treat grasses in the dry season. So perfect timing.
Oh, okay. Yep. So yes, best to treat grasses in the dry season. And so if you can wait for the best effects. Okay, and treatment intervals. Grasses are particularly resilient and troublesome. I'm sure many of you already know that from experience. And so typically you're going to want to wait 6 to 12 months to retreat a patch. And that can also vary, this study found, by what herbicide you're using. So imazapyr, you're going to wait a little bit longer. The plants will appear treated and dead for a longer period before bouncing back and rearing their evil heads again that, hey, I'm still here. Those grasses can be can be really tough buggers. They just, I don't know what is about them. I don't know enough about grass biology to understand what makes them such resilient plants, but you site managers, I'm sure, have all seen this in person. And so I'd like to thank a lot of people who have contributed to this. One group that I think gets underappreciated are the contractors. They have a really hard job. I cannot imagine being out there in the middle of summer carrying gallons on you and having your machetes and going through this habitat. That job is generally thankless, at least from the public. And so I have a lot of respect for those men and women that are doing that. and anyone else that's doing it for their job use site managers or AmeriCorps interns or whoever it is out there taking care of these. FWC's invasive plant management section, thanks for all the help you've given us and the information you've given us. And of course, for funding treatments, that is so awesome. Before joining the invasive plant section of FNA, I had no idea how much of this was going on because it's not really in the public eye. And so I was very, very impressed and happy to see that all sorts of plant treatments are going on across the state. You site managers for monitoring, treating, and checking on the plants, thank you very much. And our Florida Invasive Species Council, Florida Invasive Species Partnership, and the SISMAs underneath those, thank you guys for all the work you do, disseminating information to people and making sure these plants get their treatments. And I'm going to stop sharing and pass it on, Dexter.
Oh, gosh, faux pas again, speaking while muted. So Gundy, I did notice you ran over, but I didn't really want to interrupt it because with the new photos and stuff you had, I really wanted that to be pushed out there. So I'm definitely going to take the time up in this next presentation. I'm going to shorten it to sort of get us back on track.